is Sirius XM Doctor Radio.
From the heart of the NYU Langone Medical Center, this is Healthy Aging with Dr. Michael Perskin.
And I'm delighted to have, for the first time on this show, Mary Farkas, who is Director of Therapeutic Activities at the Hebrew Home in Riverdale, and she is a licensed creative activities. Is that right, Mary?
Arts.
Creative arts. That's what it looks like. I have bad handwriting. We have to work on my creative therapist. And the reason is that, people like to learn something new, especially this time of year. Education is a great way to keep your brain fit and engaged. And we're going to talk about what that means for seniors with Mary, who's got a fair amount of expertise in this area. So, Mary, welcome to the program. I'm sorry I botched the license.
No problem.
Thing wrong. So, and you went to graduate school for this exact thing, right?
I did.
So maybe you can talk a little bit for our listeners about what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis and how it intersects with how healthy they can keep their brain.
Sure. Well, I'm the Director of Therapeutic Activities, and that includes a whole range of lifelong learning opportunities. I have a staff that works with me, and what we basically try to do is give people a good reason to get out of bed in the morning, is what we say, and create a way to really be engaged, not just be entertained, but be engaged in your life, which I think is what we all want in our own lives on a day-to-day basis, and there's no reason that should change as we age.
Right, and of course there's special challenges when people are in a nursing home.
Right.
Special challenges, but we can talk more broadly about people who aren't. And it's actually a real conundrum. When I talk to patients, you have two camps, the ones who are, can't wait to retire, and the others who, well, I guess three camps, never want to retire, and then the third group who retired and then realized they shouldn't have retired. They don't know what to do with themselves.
Right. Right. Well, this is a great thing to do with yourself once you retire, I think. I think a great thing to think about for people is if you could do anything, if you could allow your imagination to open up and think that you could do anything or try anything, what would it be?
And to learn something new. So
exactly.
That's kind of a broad way to conceive of the therapeutic activity.
Right. And to follow your passion. Maybe you didn't get to follow your passion in your professional life, but this is a chance to do it now. We have someone at work who did not work in the field of arts professionally, but he loved art and was really interested in it. And when he came to the Hebrew Home, he was finally able to really paint for the first time in his life. And we called him our own Picasso because he was in the art studio painting every day until he died.
Right. Well, I guess our former president is an example of this. Right?
There you go.
He became a painter, right?
Right.
George Bush.
Yep.
Right. That's what he does now.
Right.
To paint.
There you go.
Yeah, and he's a pretty powerful guy.
There you go.
A bunch of years.
We all need an outlet.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you come to do this? What made you choose this? Was it your interest in arts?
I would say it was an intersection between an interest in arts and an interest in the way that I saw arts directly impacting people and their well-being, and the way I guess I experienced it impact my own well-being. The beautiful thing about creativity is you can't do it wrong. You can't get it wrong. There's no right answer, so there's no wrong answer. So it's a wonderful way to engage for anybody, no matter your functioning level. And so I watched the creative process help just, people like you and me. And then as I started to pursue graduate studies, I started to pursue how creativity could really assist people in achieving their optimal health.
Right. So can you give an example of that or tell us a story about it?
Sure. So there's a group that I co-lead once a month, drama club we call it, and there's a woman who participated in that group who has expressive dysphagia from a stroke, and she really struggles with being able to get her words out. And we had about 20 people in the group, and my staff member Kate and I, and we were working with a monologue from Taming of the Shrew to examine power and status and give people a way to talk about their own feelings around power and status. And she came up and said, this person and said, I want to do the monologue of Kate. This woman has expressive dysphagia, but she has a passion for Shakespeare.
Right, and let me ask you to pause for 1 second,
Sure.
Just so I can explain to the listeners. So expressive aphasia is a type of language disorder that we see in certain strokes where the person understands perfectly what's going on. They have no trouble comprehending, but they can't get words out. Like you could say, what are you wearing on your wrist, and they're wearing a watch, and they can't say the word watch.
Right.
They might say something like time or tick, or they'll say something related to watch, but they won't say the word watch. They just have trouble retrieving words. And they become very frustrated in general.
Yes.
So that's the type of problem that this person had.
And when she came up and said very clearly through her body language that she wanted to do this monologue, I have to share with you, I had a moment of hesitation because
Sure.
I certainly didn't want her to have an experience where she would feel ashamed. But she was very passionate, and I knew she loved Shakespeare. So I looked at the group. I sort of took the temperature of the room and thought, I think this group can hold this for her. I think they can support her through this expression. And she got into the center of the room. My staff member held the microphone for her, and she read the monologue to the very best of her ability, and the entire room broke out into spontaneous applause for her afterwards. And she just looked luminous.
Wow.
And when she played Kate, we know the character of Kate, the shrew from Taming of the Shrew. She's passionate, she's clear, she's feisty. And I watched this resident sit up in her chair, her posture changed, her body language shifted, and this is a person who's in a wheelchair all day, every day, and, obviously has these verbal challenges as well. And so, in moments like that, watching not only she had this experience, but having the experience of watching the group create that holding environment and support her was that's the reason to go to work in the morning.
That's a great story. I feel a little bad because I really don't know the monologue of Taming of the Shrew, but
that's okay.
I'm sure all our listeners do.
No, it doesn't matter.
Fans, I'm sure it was great. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing about expressive aphasia. Sometimes the patients can sing, so she read it off the page.
She read it off the page.
Yeah, sometimes that's easier. So
right.
She had that type.
She had the text, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's great. So that's a terrific example. That's a great story. So, Mary, what we're going to do is ask if we have any listeners who want to share a story like that with us about how the arts helped someone they know.
Sure.
Overcome a difficulty.
Wonderful.
Or if they have a question about how it might help someone in their life. So if you're listening and you have a question along those lines or a comment, why not email us at docs@siriusxm.com or call us at 877-NYU-DOCS. That's 877-698-3627. Now, one of the things I want to get to, Mary, is about this process kind of helping people to maintain health. That's what we talk a lot about here. But these activities are also used in children, too, right?
Absolutely. It's used across the lifespan.
Kids with behavioral disorders,
sure.
Big movement and play therapy.
Yes, very related, certainly.
And how is it different, though, than, let's say, role-playing? So role-playing is an educational technique, right? We use it with the medical students sometimes.
Sure.
They pretend they're a patient, the other person, stuff like that. And, of course, you do it in all sorts of activities in your life. Management people use it and stuff like that. So how is a creative therapeutic activity different than that? Or is that an example of a creative therapeutic activity?
I think a lot of times, it's such an interesting question. I think a lot of times the line is around what's your intention in the activity and what's the ability of the person facilitating it to hold whatever the response of the person receiving the role play or whatever the creative activity is.
Right.
So, for example, we have both art therapy and just art classes in the art studio. So it depends on the facilitator and what the goal of the group or activity is.
So maybe could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure.
If I went to an art class, I could imagine that if I'm at a time in my life where I have some time, and I say, you know what, I always wanted to learn how to draw. Right. So I would take a class, right? I would go to our Students League, or I would find an extension someplace in my area that was convenient to me and affordable, and I would take a class to learn how to draw.
Sure.
And I might practice it. How would that be different than using that as doing art therapy?
Well, I think, on a basic level, art therapy is facilitated by somebody with a clinical background and a certification in art therapy and hopefully a licensure also.
Right.
And I think that the difference is often around how much is there a link back to your own life? How much is there a focus on, how this impacts your own life, your own behaviors, and how they might shift based on this experience of art making or process through art, which is, different than an art studio where the goal might really be to learn that skill. And certainly there's some if we were to draw a Venn diagram, there'd certainly be some overlap, but the goals are subtly different in a way that I think is important.
Okay. Because I can tell you in my own life, it turns out that I always wanted, I've always loved music, but I never really learned how to play an instrument. But when my younger son was born, it became clear he sort of had a little affinity for the piano. And so what we decided to do was his mother and I got him piano lessons, which made sense.
Absolutely.
And we rented a piano, and I decided that I would concurrently take piano lessons because I kind of knew I always wanted to do it. And I figured that, that'd be fun. We'd learn together, and he was little, and I'd help him, and then he'd help me, and we'd see how that goes. And I couldn't really sustain it. I was working a little too hard to do it, but I did do it for about 6 months, and then a few years later for about 3 to 6 months again. And what I noticed that was amazing to me was two things. First of all, I started to use my left hand a lot more. In other things like typing. Sure. I'm a hunt and pecker. I don't really know keyboard skills. But I used to do it with one hand, but now I do it with two hands. So it looks almost like I know how to type, but I'm really not. I'm just using two hands.
You're fooling them.
And secondly, when I was doing the practicing, I used to get happy.
Yeah.
It was, it was a very unusual feeling. I mean, I get happy plenty, but specifically, it was like basically, having a nice glass of wine or something.
Absolutely. You felt relaxed. You felt engaged, and you were in the creative process.
Yeah. So I don't know what it was, but so there's a lot of overlap, short answer, between education and therapy.
I think there's some overlap. I do. I think there are definitely some differences, but hopefully the goal through both experiences is, you'll learn something, you'll feel different, and and I think that's the major goal, and it's just in differing degrees.
Okay. All right. Well, let's read an email that we got from Jessica, Mary. And so Jessica writes, my mom had a stroke several years ago at age 84. She's been able to paint, which is her passion, since the stroke. But in the last few months, her ability has diminished as her hands and physical coordination have deteriorated. How do you help someone overcome hurdles like this as her ability to enjoy her creative passion decreases? So that's a great question, Jessica. Thanks for writing in. And Mary, so this is, I guess, something you might see a bit in your job in the nursing home. So maybe you could elaborate or talk about this a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I think that watching loved ones, watching their abilities differ as they age and go through a health event like this is, extremely challenging. And I think that I see it as two main goals. One is to celebrate what mom can still do, what her abilities still are, and any celebration that, Jessica, you can do as a daughter, mom will feel, I think. So I really believe that very deeply. And the other is to look at, if she can't hold, maybe she was working with a thin paintbrush, can she hold a thicker paintbrush now? Can she work, maybe she can't work with paint in the same way, but could she work with, we have these paint markers that are basically like large circular, large and circular, and, they basically make big dots, but we've used them to explore pointillism so that it's an adult-related theme. Could adaptive materials be used in that sense that would be a little easier for mom to use now?
Yeah, well, I guess on the optimistic side of the discussion, many famous artists are thought to have had visual problems.
Absolutely. Matisse painted with his cane.
Yeah. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
But, people have done all sorts of interesting things with that.
And the other thing is, if art making in the same way is not possible, art looking is still possible. So, looking at, visiting museums, or if you can't visit museums, letting the museums come to you via the world of Google, even as a starting point, is a great way to still incorporate art and still incorporate the things that are important and that give mom meaning.
Okay, and how about technology and online learning? So there you mentioned sort of bringing the museum to your relatives, but what can be creative about using the technology that we have available now? Well,
the technology we have available now is so amazing. There are so many opportunities, the Google Art project of documenting museums around the world. So right now we have a system we use called IN2L, which is sort of like a giant adaptive iPad, more or less, and it has all sorts of person-centered applications on it, basically. And so it works for people who are both, still really high-functioning and also people with cognitive impairments to help them have person-centered activities that are meaningful and interesting for them, including making art via technology and all these really cool things. So I think that's a way to look at the way technology helps learning. And also, even on like the most basic level, even iPads now have iPad University, right? Which have, Harvard professors giving lectures that you can download for free on your iPad.
Right. So there's kind of two groups that, we're interested in here. So one are the people who have disease, like our writer mentioned her mom had a stroke, or people in the skilled nursing facility. And then there's a separate group, which is people who are presumably healthy, who just want to keep their mind active. And in the dementia prevention world, we talk a lot about that. So
right.
the great thing about art is it's your mind and physical. Most art, it has to, I guess the definition includes there's got to be some physical component to it, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is even if there's, a physical component, whether you're using your voice to make music or your hands to play instruments or
dance.
And, I would say that you've got to look at someone's baseline. So even if they're, as in the case of the resident I shared with expressive aphasia, even if your baseline is very small and you don't engage readily and you may only have use of one hand, etc. If you sit up just a little bit more, or you wave your hand just a little bit more, I look at that as a tremendous level of engagement, depending on what the baseline is.
Absolutely. Okay, so again, for our listeners, we're talking to Mary Farkas, who is a licensed creative art therapist. I think I got it right that time.
You did.
And she's the director of Therapeutic Activities at the Hebrew Home. And we're talking about how education as we get older, and particularly education in the arts, is helpful to keep your mind active and engaged. And that sort of, it's a good thing, right? We
think so.
Folks sometimes they focus on the day-to-day battle, or they want to have money, or their worries and about economics a lot. When really how you're spending your time is more important, because we all have the same amount of time. No one has more, no one has less. And so if you're listening, you have a question about this, why not give us a call here on the Healthy Aging Show. This is Dr. Michael Perskin. And you can call 877-NYU-DOCS. That's 877-698-3627. Or you can send an email to docs@SiriusXM.com. And we do have an email, and it is from Tommy. And Tommy writes, I'm listening to your show and I have a story to share. My father was in engineering for decades, but when he retired, he went into a deep depression. He loved his work, but had to stop. What really made a difference was when a friend at the community college asked him to teach a few classes at the local community college. It's like he has a new lease on life, teaching others what he loves and giving back to the community. I wanted to volunteer that as an idea for others. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes people are retired for reasons that don't have anything to do with their enjoyment of their position.
Absolutely.
Downsizing, things like that. Sure, teaching is great. And I think the best teachers typically are people with a lot of experience or a lot of enthusiasm. And
absolutely.
As far as my own experience with teachers, right?
Mine too.
So people have experience or they're enthusiastic.
And it sounds like Tommy's dad has done what we all hope to do, right? Which is find a way to continue feeling like we're making meaning with our life and like we're engaged in our life and doing something that matters and connects us and keeps us in relationships with other people, and that's great.
So how does it, maybe you can talk a little bit about how does this actually work on a day-to-day basis at a place like the Hebrew Home? When you have a new resident, do you guys do an assessment for therapeutic activities?
Absolutely. We do an assessment to assess what were past interests and what might be current interests. We always, we bring people a calendar of everything that we offer, both on the neighborhood that they're living on and off the neighborhood on our main floors. And, we really encourage people to try a little bit of everything. I always say to everybody, if they say, oh, no, I'm not going to do that, I say, okay, you have the right to refuse, and I'm going to maintain the right to invite you again. And that usually, makes them smile, and so sometimes they'll agree to come after that.
And do most people end up participating in one thing or another?
I would say in one thing or another, yeah.
Well, that's great. And what are some of the popular activities?
Well, a new activity, newly this year for 2014, we work with a wonderful professor from Sarah Lawrence College, David Paris, and he is coming to teach, he teaches our Hebrew Home University, we call it. He's been coming for almost 10 years, and he teaches classes often in politics. And he's teaching a class starting next Friday on religion and secular society. And so that's a very popular class when Hebrew Home University is in session, which runs about 24 weeks of the year. Those are very popular.
Okay, but that's a lecture series, and they maybe have some projects, so that's not, that seems a little passive.
Oh, really? If you sit in the class, I don't think you'd feel that way.
So is it a discussion?
Oh, very much so. I mean, there's reading, but that's of course optional depending on people's functioning level.
Right.
But it gets very heated in there.
Okay. And what other kind of activities do they do that's more hands-on?
Well, we have a big art studio with a lot of different offerings, from copper enameling to ceramics to painting to mixed media to printmaking, all different forms of art and art making. We have art history. We have Glee Club. We have the more traditional things you'd look for, like game-based and recreation things. So we kind of span the spectrum, as just like we all in our lives need things that are both just relaxing and then things that really challenge us. We try to really bridge all worlds.
Well, this is really interesting to me, because I can tell you that probably on my top 10 list of things that I think I observe in patients that I don't feel that medicine, my own experience, or the world has stuff to offer them, is people who are older who don't have an activity.
Absolutely.
And they're kind of at a loss to do it, because the people who are interested in it, I mean, I've had amazing patients over the years who, they pick up a sport, they teach, they coach, they do an art, right? So there are not a few dozen patients I've had over 25 years in practice, but they always want to be a sculptor or a painter, and they take some courses and they do it. Some of them become successful at it. Most of them, it's for their own.
Sure, for the love.
Right, which is great. So that's actually pretty common. But more common is they really don't know. And if you say, you should pick, what did you always want to do? You should do it. And it's tough to get folks to do behavior change. A lot comes down to behavior change. So how do you tell people to go about picking an activity? Because that's what I would say if I were advising the patients. Like, okay, so I don't know what I want to do. So how do I figure it out?
I would say, okay, well, tell me one thing you like. Everybody has something that they like. What's one thing you like? And whatever it is, then I would try to create a bridge from that to, if they tell me it's sports, I'd say, come try sports hour. If they would say it's music, I'd say come to the concerts. If they say it's, I have a man who loves woodworking. And so I said, oh great, let me order some woodworking supplies for you. Come and help me start a woodworking program, And so it really depends on just finding that hook that gets people to say yes, okay, I'll try it. And from there, once you can start building the relationship, it doesn't really matter so much what you're doing; it matters with whom you're doing. I think, because that's what sustains, right, the relationship.
Well, yeah, you have to have some innate desire, otherwise you're going to get bored or frustrated.
Right, and you need to have a connection with the person who you're working with in some way that makes you feel like, okay, maybe I'll try this new thing that I haven't tried before because I feel safe trying this out, and maybe not doing a great job, and that's all right. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's what I love about creativity. Again, you can't get it wrong. We have so many residents who come into the art studio who have never painted before and say, well, I'm visually impaired now. Well, I've never held a paintbrush, and I always say, great, I can't draw a straight line, and my office is in the art studio, and they still let me come here, and so,
Right.
So it usually, it's really about creating that connection and that space for creativity and an invitation.
And if people are looking for programs in their area, how might they find out about things like this?
Well, you mean about creative aging programs or programs of any kind, activities of any kind?
Well, either start with creative aging stuff because, the people, let's say if you're in Iowa or in New Mexico, how would you go about looking?
Well, a great resource is the National Center for Creative Aging, which is, actually I'm not sure of their current web address, but if you just Google search National Center for Creative Aging, they have a whole national directory of all different arts and aging programs. They're a wonderful organization out of Washington, D.C., so that's a good starting place for people. The other thing is, I would do basic things like check your local universities, check your local libraries, things like that, because you'll be surprised where, what little art center might be offering a class or, a lot of times libraries are doing continuing education classes on computers, which is a great way to connect with the modern world. So.
Right. I think Beth, our producer, just looked it up. It's creativeaging.org.
Perfect. They're a wonderful organization.
Creativeaging.org. So that is a link to some stuff that might be nearby to people.
Right.
Not everyone could go to the Hebrew Home.
Right. There's a national directory there.
Right. And of course, just being a little creative to look it up.
That's right.
And how do you help motivate people? I mean, sometimes people aren't motivated, and I have typically one of the kids or maybe their spouse is with them, and the patient is only complaining a little, their loved one is complaining more, and they look to me to kind of be the spark.
Yep.
And it's difficult because it's usually doesn't work in one swift kick doesn't work.
No, I remind them, usually it's the child, we're both here for your mom or dad, so, we'll get there. Maybe slowly, but we'll get there. So let's take it one step at a time.
So what's the first step, though?
The first step is to build the relationship. The first step is to say, is to make a point to get to know that person and to invite them to the point where if there's somebody with cognitive impairments, maybe it's only that they smile when they see you. If there's somebody who's cognitively intact, maybe they're able to really respond to your invitation. But the first step is really to get to know them on whatever level you can.
Yeah, makes sense. And when you have folks in these programs, how big are they typically?
They vary widely. I mean, I would say some are as small as 8 and some are as big as 40. I mean, and then our concerts often have over 200 people.
Right, so there's really, at your place, there's a rich assortment.
We're very fortunate. There's a rich assortment. We're very lucky in that way.
And what do you tell people who, or do you have any knowledge on people in midlife? They're actually in mid-career or late career, doing fine, their life is good, but they have this, they're not really engaged. It's sort of, rinse, wash, and repeat type of thing.
Yep.
And what do you suggest for them? They feel they're in a rut, basically.
I suggest they do the same thing that I would do with a resident who's newly at the nursing home. I would say, what's one thing you really like? And spend some time thinking about that. And maybe it's just that you start Googling TED Talks on that subject. Maybe it's that you take an iPad University class as you commute to work. Maybe it's in a small way that you find your way to link into that thing that you really enjoy that makes you feel engaged and present.
Right. That makes sense. I think it's iTunes University.
iTunes University, excuse me.
That's what it is. No, that's okay. Well, they're not a sponsor. We're okay. Okay. And what are some of the evidence about this? So are there, you've gone to graduate school in this field. So what is the evidence that this helps people?
Well, in the various creative arts therapies, there's a lot of different qualitative and quantitative data on the efficacy of, and on both mood state and cognition, and music therapy in particular has done a lot of research. And so, bottom line, it's been shown when done well and implemented by somebody skilled, it's been shown to be really effective and useful with people, especially at the end of life.
Great. Well, Mary, this has been a really interesting discussion. I've learned a lot. I know our listeners have as well. And again, we had Mary Farkas on, who is the director of Therapeutic Activities at the Hebrew Home, and she's a licensed creative arts therapist. So, Mary, thank you very much for joining us on the program. And we are next going to speak to Gabrielle Redford, who's the American Association of Retired Persons Magazine Editorial Projects Manager and Health Medicine Editor. And we're going to talk to her about things ranging from indoor heating problems